I want to welcome everybody to the Daily Cheat Sheet here with Golan Ramraz and
Shalom.
Guy Goldstein, who's got a beautiful new haircut. And I
Mm.
encourage everybody to go to Rumble, YouTube, or YouTube Shorts to look at what his haircut looks like because you look remarkable.
Thank
And
you.
do you get half off your haircuts?
That's
You know
very
what?
funny.
No, they still make you pay full price, but they pay extra attention to the beard.
Okay.
I will tell you this. My dad has been bald since the day I was born. They used to trim a little bit on the little edges over here. They charged them full price.
It makes you feel better.
So I want to, I've been getting really angry, and I think a lot of people are getting angry, but I'm angrier at conservatives right now sometimes than I am. Golan, as you well know, I often get angrier at conservatives than I do get at leftists because I expect leftists to be leftist and liberals to be liberal or whatever. And this expectation I have of conservatives always falls flat. It falls on deaf ears. And I'm referring right now to obviously with the messaging that's been going on. Kristi Noem came out right away and said, she said he's a domestic terrorist, right? She's the one that labeled him or branded him a domestic terrorist, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And by definition, she's 100% correct.
By definition, you mean by the literal definition of domestic terrorism?
Yeah, well, that's all we could go on in life is the definition, right? If you go to court, by definition, in trial, he's a domestic terrorist. And so is everybody on the street in Minnesota that took over the streets, just like they did in Portland. And it was being ruled out of fear. They were terrorizing the people in their areas. And this is something people are not talking about, the amount of terror. If you're a store owner in that area, how good could business be with these degenerates out there Golan? So, and take that out of the equation, what they were doing to ICE was terrorizing them. If you're getting in people's faces constantly that are trying to protect you, this isn't like those jokes out of a movie like in the UK where they try, where people to get the guards to move a little bit so little kids will make, faces or whatever. This is like serious stuff going on.
Yeah, look, you're certainly right. I mentioned this on yesterday's show that there are certain things you are legally allowed to do if you are part of a protest, and there are certain things you are not legally allowed to do. And the minute you cross the line, you go from being, let's say, a protester, even though that word has kind of started to lose all its meaning, and you become a domestic terrorist, or at the very least, a criminal. You are breaking the law. And as I mentioned yesterday, I would love if there was just a series of paddy wagons sitting by the side of the road. And every time somebody did something that was out of line, legally speaking, they just get chucked into a paddy wagon. They sit there all day until the paddy wagons are full, as you mentioned, as they used to do on Sunset Boulevard. And then
Not
they
Sunset,
get
it's at Bleecker Street.
Oh, Bleecker Street. Excuse me. I was thinking of the LA version, which was Sunset Boulevard. But yes, the LA and New York, they both used to do this. I think they can implement this once again. And since you mentioned it, pulled it up here while we're talking about it. I'm going to read a couple of actual dictionary definitions of what domestic terrorist.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for.
Domestic terrorism is. So I'm going to give you a couple. First,
can I tell you something before you start?
Yeah,
I just want to tell you something before you start, Guy, and I'm going to say this. We have a friend that his daughter is 26 and listens to the show, and so much of what these episodes are about are geared towards people her age, because she's on our side, but we could still get those people. We could still get the 26-year-olds, 27-year-olds, whatever age they are, go on by being smart, by being accurate, and by being correct, and giving them exact definitions of how to talk about this stuff.
And I think this is why I do on a regular basis for our listeners say, let's pause for a moment. I want to give actual definitions, and this is one of those moments. So we'll start with the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition, which is the organized use of violence or criminal acts by a citizen or citizens of a country against their own country or fellow citizens. I'm going to add or law enforcement, even though that's implicit here, in order to intimidate or coerce a civilian population or influence government policy. Well, I think that before I even get into any other version of this, that is very clearly what was done in Minnesota. I'm going to read another one. Domestic terrorism involves violence, criminal acts committed by individuals or groups within the United States to further ideological goals stemming from domestic influences such as political, religious, social, racial, or environmental factors without foreign direction aimed at intimidating civilians or influencing government policy. And it talks about ideological motives, talks about domestic origin and violent actions. One thing that's important to note is that not all of these acts are domestic terrorism. Some of them are, and some of them are simply criminal. In either case, obstruction of justice, for example, is not domestic terrorism. That is a criminal act. You still should get punished for committing a criminal act if you're using violence or, and this is an important note, coming from the dictionary again, or the credible threat of violence, then that absolutely qualifies as domestic terrorism.
Guy,
So
you've been silent the whole time, so I'm going to let you I'll just let you jump in 1 second. I'm just curious about one thing. If you attack a federal officer, does that not become a federal crime and not a local crime?
All right,
You
Guy.
might want to, guys, people listening on the audio can't see you nodding. You might want to. Now is the time to
it's
speak
the
up.
beard. He thinks he'll nod hard enough.
I am
this
not a
beard
lawyer,
will
but
resonate.
from everyone that I've heard, all the legal commentary that I've heard on the issue of attacking a federal agent, officer, or an agent of the federal courts is a federal crime. So it's.
And by the way,
yes.
I went to law school for about an eighth of a second before I realized that it was going to be way too boring for me because torts almost killed me. But I will say that absolutely, if you attack a federal officer, it is a clear, bright line in U.S. law. It is a federal crime. That is
Okay,
100% the case.
If we're already talking about definitions, though, I think that I spent several hours watching videos from various things that are happening in Minnesota. I think the biggest problem with the definition isn't the domestic terrorism. That's clear. I think the biggest abuse of language is the use of the term protest.
Yeah,
What is happening in Minnesota is not a protest. First of all, the level of coordination is a military operations level of coordination. The fact that they have spotters, the fact they have dispatchers, they have people on the ground, they have people who can reinforce them, they have medics, legal teams, right? This is a coordinated action.
Organized communication, yes.
At the very least, it's a civic militia, right? So the other thing is, a protest, and this is why it's journalistic malpractice, right? Because when the reader reads the term protest, you imagine a bunch of people standing in front of City Hall with pickets saying, we want Chili Willy, we want Chili Willy.
Yeah. As Besson brought up.
When you look at the videos and you see what's happening, that's the same scenes that you see in the West Bank when Palestinians are attacking the IDF. That's what it's comparable to. It's the same scenes you see in Malmo when the immigrant communities are attacking the police. It is not a protest. First of all, protest is it's debatable whether or not protest is actually democratic. It's certainly part of liberalism. It's not necessarily democratic. But the second part is protest ends when you stop using your words to ask for something as a group, right? That it is, and it's journalistic malpractice that every paper, including right-wing papers, by the way, call these people protesters. They are not protesters. They are rioters. They might be a resistance activists. You can come up with whatever name you want. They're not protesting.
Guy, hold on a second. I just want to jump in for a second because Golan, he brings up a really good point. So let's just break it down, right? So remember years ago, I am an advocate for gay marriage. That might bother some people, but I am. And I used to go with friends and go to rallies for gay marriage. I didn't bring a gun. I didn't bring I don't think I brought a sign or anything, but that was a rally. It wasn't exactly a protest, right? And then you go to what is a protest? Well, we're protesting this animal clinic for, killing dogs, or we're protesting an abortion clinic, or vice versa. We're protesting. We're outside with signs. To Guy's point,
using our words,
right? To Guy,
yes.
It's not a rally.
I'm going to go further than rioting, because I think rioting is, yes, that's exactly right. I think rioting is something that A, might be spontaneous, and B, generally is just chaos. This is not this. This is not chaos. This is not disordered. This is organized, and it is done where they will have some chaos, but it is weaponized. chaos. This is
And
important.
you know the right word. You know the right word for a coordinated militia action against the federal government.
Go
That's
ahead.
insurrection.
That's correct. And I will say that this particular version of insurrection didn't just appear one day. It isn't something that just popped into their head. Think about what it is. These are masked mobs. They'll put on a COVID mask and pretend that has something to do with it, but it's a masked mob. They're targeting, they're harassing government officials, federal officials, etc. They're chanting, they're blocking traffic, they're physical obstruction, moral blackmail, all the different things, right? And they're doing the cycle that we've seen 1,000 times: provoke, film the response, cry repression. This playbook already existed, right? This is not something that they invented. This is not something they came up with because they saw it in a movie. These are the Palestinian tactics that were perfected in Judea and Samaria. This is exactly the same thing they've been doing for years. They're creating constant friction. They're swarming authority figures. They're denying legitimacy. They're escalating with just enough force to get a response, then screaming victimhood when the consequences come their way. This is exactly the same thing. And it doesn't mean that the Minnesotans were necessarily trained by the Palestinians, but you don't need formal training. When this terror, and this is to Guy's point in terms of journalistic malpractice, when the terror tactics are live streamed and sanitized daily by the media, by NGOs, by academia, calling it decolonial struggle or whatever BS nonsense they label it as, social media rewarding that kind of escalation, not restraint, etc. All of that is exactly the same thing. It's all the stuff that we see coming out of Palestine or the Palestinians.
100%. And obviously, we're all very excited about this issue and very animated. So we have a few times stepped over each other. It's not because we don't respect each other. We're just so enthused by what the other has to say. But Guy, can you repeat that point that you brought up about insurrection?
At the end of the day, if you're using accurate definitions, coordinated armed attacks against federal officers is the definition of an insurrection.
Thank you for that, because most people are extremely unaware of that. So to bring back to January, there was no coordination, right? This is actively being coordinated, and everybody's so hyper-focused, Guy, on this gun. Everybody's hyper-focused on this gun. And again, you know what? If you are going to go to, I really don't feel bad. Go on, called it a tragedy yesterday. I don't look at this as a tragedy. I look at this as suicide by cop. If you decide to go with a gun and have a gun and instigate with law enforcement, who are much more heavily locked and loaded than you are homicide by cop at that point.
So what's interesting
Suicide
is,
by cop.
Yeah.
What's interesting is in Israel before October 7th, there was a really rough year of civil strife. Roughly every week there was somewhere from 100,000 to 1,000 protesters in the street. And most of these protesters had military experience. They knew how to use guns. Many of these protesters owned firearms. The main group of protesters was a group called Brothers in Arms, who were all experienced soldiers.
By the way, just for the record, great Dire Straits album.
Absolutely great Dire Straits album, one of my favorites. They were armed soldiers. They were soldiers, all of whom owned firearms. And when they would issue invitations to people to gather to protest, they would specifically include in the invitation, bring signs, bring noise, bring speakers, do not bring weapons, right? They actively, because they were protesting, they actively de-escalated preemptively, because they understood that if you show up to a protest with guns, then if things escalate, they escalate catastrophically. As a response, the police also brought less aggressive tools, because they understood that the protesters had preemptively de-escalated. So the police were able to preemptively de-escalate it. They brought water cannons. They brought sandbag shotguns. They brought tear gas canisters, right? They brought non-lethal solutions. And so the protesters came de-escalated. The police came de-escalated. And even when things did ramp up, people were arrested. In 1 year of protests, with hundreds and thousands of people protesting every single week, 0 deaths. Because
and by the way, there's one other difference too. There's one other difference too, which is the people who were protesting, whether you agree with them or not, were students. They were soldiers. They were reservists. They were families. They were workers. It was never organized militias.
I was also going to say, you know what the other differences go on? And I'm really happy how eloquently Guy brought up that point. Not that you don't bring up points eloquently, Golan. It's just a given. It's that the fact that when October 7th happened, every single day immediately canceled the rallies and the protests. And every single one of those people that was able to serve, whether they were reservists or active duty, went back to service. Okay. So juxtapose that to these jackasses in Minnesota or whoever is doing it. You have literally zero shred of what it is to be an American.
By the
You
way, I
literally,
decided to also look up the dictionary definition of insurrection. And my God, if it isn't a copy paste from what we're seeing in Minnesota, which is an organized attempt by, this is Cambridge Dictionary, an organized attempt by a group of people to defeat or change an established government or leader, especially by violence. The Oxford Dictionary takes it a step further, a violent uprising against an authority or government. So we know that the
Like you didn't
authorities,
believe me.
the Fed, no, it's important
I believe you.
for our listeners to hear that it's not just our opinion, it's not just our version of events. These are definitions, and you will never hear the mainstream media call these people insurrectionists. Never.
Listen, yeah, I love what you both absolutely brought to the table. But Guy, your point, which is such a great point, which is what's going on, what went on in Israel, which was also, we have to add, supported by the Biden regime. It's under investigation how much money went into, obviously, Soros and all those other groups, but a lot of money from the administration actually went into those
USAID.
leftist protests. Sorry?
USAID, which was discovered by Doge, and its incredibly productive efforts to cut the US's social agenda.
You know, Guy, I think the haircut has made you a little less chatty.
Going for those YouTube shorts, they've been getting a lot of traction. I need to say things elegantly and tightly.
Okay. We're not trying to build a show off of YouTube shorts, but and I love that that's probably why you got a haircut. So good work on that. But I want to move on a little bit though to the messaging thing. And Guy, this really bothers me, and I don't mind bringing it up, go on over and over and over and over and over again. Is the messaging? Obviously, Tom Homan, and somebody made a joke. I think it was Kennedy on Fox News, or maybe Tom Shalhoub, that brought this up. If Trump's idea of de-escalating is bringing in Tom Holman, so obviously President Trump is not backing down on this. But Tom Holman is exceptional at what he does. He's exceptional at his job, and I'm happy he's doing it, and I'm happy he's not backing down. Listen, if we win the midterms, we win the midterms. If we lose, we lose. We went down fighting for what we believe in. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. This isn't about the midterm elections or 2028. This is saving the freaking country from some of the worst scum on the earth that live in our country right now. The absolute worst scum on the earth. Rapists, drug dealers, people that will slaughter families. This is who DHS and ICE are capturing, okay? Let's make no mistake about that, Guy. And the problem is they're not messaging this.
And one of the things that I was reading recently was, first of all of the attention to these things is focused on one city, right? And that this has been the case for a small number of cities throughout the country, because most cities in the country cooperate with ICE and DHS, and they get almost all of the people who are appropriate targets, people who have either been accused of serious crimes or convicted of them and are also illegal, and they deport them. No nonsense, no one hurt, no drama, no news stories. The focal points of bringing these coordinated militias to specific places is all about making a scene. And that's what makes it so difficult to get the scum of the earth out of the country. And so you've absolutely got this situation where it's manufactured to create that chaos, to create the messaging, to confuse the messaging. And I just want to add to what you're saying, which is, and then whitewashed by the media. And then you have people, even even Republicans and people in the administration who are trying to make clear what's going on, using the language the media has used to whitewash. We should have discipline too. And you say, we're not going to, he was an insurrectionist. It is a tragedy that an American citizen was killed. It is important to understand that we cannot protect every person that's involved in an insurrection on both sides. And it's our job to protect the people on the side of America, or the United States of America, if we need to be specific.
And I'll add something to it too, is that, first of all, very well put, Guy. And I think it's really important that we get that message out there. But also, speaking of messaging, Judah, do you notice that the left and the media have completely pivoted? You don't hear about illegal immigration at all anymore. The only story you hear about now are federal agents versus Americans.
Yeah.
Right? That's their narrative control. It's no longer about law enforcement or public safety. It is just basically a narrative jujitsu. Now, we used to have conversations about cartel pipelines, repeat offenders, sanctuary failures, illegal immigration, all of these things. It's all gone. And the only narrative now is federal agents versus America.
Because you want to know why? It's
Yeah.
polling well.
Well, not only is it polling well, it's how they change the narrative. When the facts on immigration are losing you the argument, you flip the frame. You stop debating law enforcement, you start prosecuting the authorities, and then the only thing that anyone pays attention to now is not border chaos or criminal illegals or fentanyl deaths or any of the other things we've talked about a lot of the time. The only thing they focus on now, after this emotional reframing, is, man, we got to make sure that these federal authorities, aka the Gestapo, aka ICE, is the new villain, and Border Patrol is the militarized, jackbooted thugs and all this stuff. The only thing we want to hear about is these poor Americans. Let's put aside or not mention at all in our news stories that these people are armed, attacking officers, trying to hit officers with cars. At the very least, they are obstructing justice. And at the very maximum, they're domestic terrorists. None of that is being mentioned. It is all about how sad the story is and how everybody on the side of America is the villain.
Well said, both of you. And move on a little bit. Today is World, as Guy pointed out. I asked him before the show, because people are remembering the Holocaust. I was like, did I miss? Obviously there's Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron, but thank you for telling me it's World Remembrance Holocaust
International
Day.
Holocaust Remembrance Day.
International. Thank you. And I just want to say something very quickly, which is really where I think a lot of the issues especially with Israel, come from. And I want to explain to people just a little bit. And I brought this up on the show. My mother raised us, my father, but my mother specifically raised us as her family. She's a first generation, raised us we weren't identifying with the Holocaust. We weren't identifying with being victims. My mother raised us to identify with Israel and never having to be the victim again. And so she pulled me out of a school that taught Yiddish, right? Because she said, and she doesn't always remember saying this, but I remember it, is if we need to run somewhere, you don't need to learn Yiddish, you need to learn Hebrew. And that was in second grade. And I think the world still associates and identifies Jews as victims. And they can't accept the fact that many of us don't want to be victims like Israel. And we have a state, we have a homeland.
I have to just speak about something, because you're speaking about precisely why this Remembrance Day bothers me. Guy and I have had this conversation offline before. We talked about this years ago. Remember that, Guy? Years ago. There is a fundamental difference between the International Holocaust Remembrance Day and Yom HaShoah, which is the day of remembrance of the Holocaust through the Jewish and Israeli lens. Yes. And the difference is that Yom HaShoah is rooted in Jewish resistance and heroism. It includes the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and the 6 million Jews that were killed, obviously, are remembered, but it emphasizes the Jews also being resilient, fighting back, and rebuilding their society. The International Holocaust Remembrance Day is specifically observed, January 27th, which is the anniversary. Say it again. By the Red Army in 1945. That was established by none other than the United Nations, who made sure that they weren't going to highlight Jewish resistance or Jewish strength. That was
in 1991, by the way. For the first 50 years after the Holocaust, they didn't remember it all, and then they decided maybe they should.
Right. And then
make a thing.
They remembered the day that somebody else did something for the poor Jews, for the victims.
They Spielberg the day.
That very, very well put. And I just want to say this: the core difference for those of you listening comes down to International Holocaust Remembrance Day is the All Lives Matter version of this. This was a crime against humanity, but here's a group of people. We all fought back. We saved the day. It's all good. Yom HaShoah says this was an attempt at the destruction of the Jewish people. We remember our dead our resistance and our responsibility to survive. Never forget. That's the difference. So I just want, I had to point that out because of
No,
what you're saying
I'm
yesterday.
extremely happy you both brought up. I think you both gave brilliant history lessons there, and I'm happy I brought it up, and I'm happy you expanded on it, Guy. And one of the things that bothers me so much about this is, as everybody's doing this, all we hear is the rhetoric of Nazis from the left, of Gestapo, of brown shirts, of all. So it's great. It's like imagine if like it's Black History Month, but everybody's still saying the N word. Everybody's saying
Or
go
they
back.
waited until Black History Month to start saying
That's
the N
exactly
word.
that's exactly right, Guy. And it's like, I'm happy you're recognizing us. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for recognizing our victimhood, but not our strength, which is Israel. And so yeah, go on. Guy.
So I think what you're saying about the Nazism is actually really interesting, and it connects to an article I wrote.
I do that every once in a while.
I wrote an article this morning about exactly this topic, which is the reason that everyone's a Nazi, everything's a brown shirt, and the analogy that everybody particularly on the left in the West, is able to use to describe their entire moral frame for the universe is because after World War II, that moment was adopted as the moral frame for Western civilization. It was after the rejection of God. It was after a move away from religiosity. So particularly Europe, but also later the United States, as it got more into sort of into the 60s and sort of the post-religious version of the United States, the World War II became sort of the founding myth of the Western civilization. So to people in the West, Nazi is the ultimate evil. Hitler is the worst, is Satan. Brown shirts are demons, I guess, right? But that became their mythology and therefore the language they use. To Jews, it's not that. Because for Jews, if you remember back to the very beginning of the October 7th War, we went with Amalek. We have a mythology that predates the World War II by thousands of years, which already identifies the character of the ultimate villain who just wants to destroy you because they represent pure evil. And so what happens is people in this Western frame that don't manage to connect to something more deeply rooted don't have a concept of good and evil beyond Nazi and not Nazi. And now what you see happening is they've also managed to confuse Nazi and not Nazi, so they can't tell the difference between the two.
Well said, and which goes to the next thing. By the
Well,
way,
can I just let the audience know something, because they will definitely not know what Amalek is, and I think it's important because they probably heard it, and they probably heard it misused by people who were trying to vilify those who said it. Amalek is, again, as you mentioned, from the Bible. It was Joseph's brother. Is that right? Jacob's brother. Excuse me, Jacob's brother. So it was Jacob. There was a nomadic tribe descended from Jacob's brother, and they are the ones who were attacking the Israelites right after the Exodus from Egypt. They were trying to kill the weak first, the children, the elderly, the sick, et cetera, et cetera. They were just cowardly predators that were an unprovoked moral evil. And so that's why they're used as the symbol for all of this. We don't need to find something in the modern era, because the Jews have been attacked by unprovoked amoral evil for a very, very long time. We've got plenty of examples. Amalek is the ultimate and the first.
Well said. And if you're just tuning in, you are listening to the Daily Cheat Sheet. For the people that are listening on audio, we are on Rumble every day. And it is very confusing for people giving that 5 stars, not because they don't want to. Apple just makes it really difficult. So basically, when you look at the screen in the episodes, just scroll down a little bit and you'll be able to see that 5-star review that we would love for you to get. Even if you hate us, still give us that 5 stars.
Yeah.
I do that with restaurants. You know why? With the hope that they could get better. Guy, going on, though, the reason obviously this is also an issue is because, listen, there are a bunch of us that have done a lot of pro bono work for people in Washington with helping them message. And I think that's why it's so irksome, this horrific messaging. And when I read a story of a person I absolutely adore and love, and yes, he might come across as myopic or tunnel vision sometimes, but the work that Stephen Miller is trying to do and has done is nothing but to save America. So all he wants to do is save America. And when you have the Lincoln Project, please tell, I sent you the story about the Lincoln Project. So if you could please talk about it.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I was kind of shocked to read that they would use that language, use the sorts of language that they use. But I believe the story was that the Lincoln Project, in a podcast or in a discussion they were having, just literally said that they hope that Stephen Miller is the first one on the dock in the Nuremberg trials when this is all over.
That's right.
Which again comes back to both the fact that they have no moral anchors that they can go to other than the Nazis, but also to use that to make that statement specifically against a Jewish man for a crime that has no similarity for not even a crime. So I'm sorry, for having opinions, which are not bad opinions, right? That might be, you know what? It's not even the most un-American thing I've heard all week. I want to say it's the most un-American thing I've heard all week, and it's not. And I'm sick of the fact that it's not, but it is.
Yeah, it's second to Tim Walz saying about the diary of Anne Frank with the Somali
Right.
children. Right. So today's not Holocaust Remembrance Day for Tim Walz. It's the diary of a Somali kid. That's Tim Walz's new Holocaust Remembrance Day. But you missed the point about what you said before the show. So I want to remind you of what you said about the Nuremberg trials. It happened already.
Yeah, the Nuremberg trials happened in 1947, 1948, and ended. That was the point of them. It was a closed book.
Yeah, it was a closed book.
You can't
right.
go back in time.
Yeah,
It was. You know what's interesting is now you've just invoked this week's International Holocaust Remembrance Day. This week we had two. We had this guy talking about the Nuremberg trials, and we had Tim Walz talking about the Diary of Anne Frank. This is a continual touch point. I think part of it is most of these people, and I mean this because of brain capacity, but also because of they're just not students of history. They're students of whatever TikTok is teaching them or whatever's popular, a particular thing in the nostrum that particular week. But they don't understand what the Holocaust is because they simply mythologize it. It isn't a specific Jewish catastrophe with a concrete history, with like intent and mechanisms and specific people. It's just been flattened. It's a vague symbol of badness. It's a metaphor for oppression. It's a universal morality tale. It's detached from the Jews. It's detached from the actual Nazis. So then that's why they, they'll throw things at, the border enforcement, Nazis, police, Nazis, Israel's Nazis, which is, of course, Holocaust inversion. It's the worst version of it. It's grotesque. But when everything is Nazism, you effing morons, nothing is.
So can I tell you what's worse about the Lincoln Project using the Nuremberg trials from an America First perspective?
Yeah, can I just say one thing? We didn't exactly give the quote. So let me give the quote by Rick Wilson, failed.
Make sure you include the part where he wants to put him to death.
Well, yeah, but I also want to say he worked on Romney's campaign or McCain's failed campaign. I believe it was Romney's failed campaign. So he goes, when this is done, I want Stephen Miller to be the first one who is tried and convicted and effing dangles, okay? I want him to be brought before a court of law because he is the sole executive that runs all this DHS, ICE, the ICE Stapo. So Rick Wilson, great branding there. Yeah, no, but he, came up with his own term, ICE Stapo. And let's not forget the Lincoln Project. This is how they make their money. This is how they survive, is by being never Trumpers, going.
It. They rally the base. They make headlines. They draw attention. That's all they want. Can they make a little extra money? Can they get a little extra power? It's ridiculous.
But again, the subtext that people don't think about because they just use the Holocaust as words. They don't really understand it. The Nuremberg trials were the beginning of the occupation, the beginning of the complete removal of the sovereignty of Germany after the war. So Germany was occupied after the war. The Nuremberg trials put the German leadership on trial by a court or tribunal. What that implies is a loss of sovereignty of Germany at that point lost its sovereignty to something above it, which is, again, not constitutional. It's not this. This is something that even if the United States did, in some bizarre universe, commit some horrific crime against humanity, the last thing the United States Constitution allows for is for the United States to submit itself to a supranational court. When you're talking about American law, there is one highest court in the land, and that's the last court. The United States isn't signed on to the ICJ. It's not signed on to the ICC. The United States has a policy of not allowing anybody to step on its sovereignty, and that's what a Nuremberg trial suggests. It suggests someone from outside should sit in judgment over the United States of America.
And by the way, thank you very much for that. And for people that are not familiar, just we don't belong to the we don't belong to The Hague. I mean, there are a few other countries that don't recognize The Hague, even though it's sponsored by the United Nations, and they're not the greatest nations, but America and Israel do not participate in The Hague. We do not recognize it. But go on. I just wanted to say something because this is being reported, and there's obviously a few stories about this. There's a nurse who as a tip to sabotage ICE. She wants nurses and people. She's telling people how to sabotage them via like injecting them with stuff.
Oof. I have not heard this story.
Yeah, it's a paralytic drug. Instructing healthcare providers to sabotage agents.
So this is in Minnesota?
Virginia.
This is in Virginia. Whoa. And what, she did it online? Is there evidence of her doing it?
Yeah, there's a video of her doing it.
Well, first of all, okay, they're going to be coming to get you soon. But also, wow, I don't even know where to begin.
I don't know what you say to that. I'm sorry I brought it up. I'm sorry.
I'll tell you why I'm not sorry you brought it up. Because what did we see? Again, I'm not going to compare everything, but right now there's a lot of stuff that feels like there's some parallel stories here. Do you remember how many times in the UK, for instance, there were all these medical professionals that were like, hey, if a Jew comes into your clinic, here's the way to hurt them, or here's the way to not help them, or here's the way to kill them. This thing where healthcare professionals who have a duty to protect life, of course, it's in their Hippocratic oath and all of that, literally are becoming the mechanisms by which these things are coming down. That is a huge, that's not just reckless. It's not protest. It's not any of those things. It's potentially murder, first of all. But beyond that, it is something that should make everybody, and unfortunately, I don't want to say this, I don't want people to be afraid to go to the doctor, but you really need to know who your healthcare professional is. It's something that Judah and I have talked about offline when the Jew
It's
stuff
something
started.
I've discussed on this show. It's something I've discussed on this show. It's one of the I know all of my doctors are conservatives. And when I'll never forget when I brought up the story when I almost died from my bowel obstruction. And I was in sepsis. 33,000 white blood cell count. I almost died. And the doctor said, like, what do you do for a living? And I didn't want to say. I was scared to say because my life was literally in his hands. What if he was some, guy, some crazy liberal? And remember, as I'm in the worst pain I could be in, the first thoughts going through my mind is his political affiliation.
And we're talking about a world in which they have said political violence is A-okay. So you had right to be frightened.
Well, and again, it's a world in which they've painted people they don't agree with politically as Nazis, which are the ultimate evil, and therefore it's perfectly reasonable to it's not unreasonable to kill a Nazi. Nobody has judged their grandfather who came home from the war and said, I killed 100 Nazis. Right? Nobody was like,
no, you're like, damn, that guy was cool.
That's right. I'm saying there is zero judgment about killing a Nazi. And so when you know that they define the people that they disagree with politically as Nazis, they have established an environment in which killing people they disagree with is legitimate and reasonable. And you see this phenomenon around the world. There were the Australian nurses that got caught because they said that they were making comments that whenever an Israeli or a Jew comes into their hospital, they get them out. Now, it wasn't real. They hadn't actually done it, but it doesn't matter because at that point, how do you know it's not real? And I think the consequence today is people lose their licenses, and I'm not sure that that's enough. Like, I think that these are the sorts of people that if you don't make an example of them,
100%.
It puts the entire field at risk. And just to tell you, I was at a conference today where someone was talking about Florida, and they were talking about the incident in Florida where a bunch of online influencers went out to a nightclub and got the nightclub to play a recent song by Kanye West, celebrating a certain, temporarily relevant Austrian dictator. The response in Florida was immediate. Before anyone even managed to coordinate, before anyone managed to coordinate a protest or any sort of complaint about this,
they fired everybody.
The owners of the nightclub had shut things down. They fired the DJ. Every single entertainment venue in the Miami-Dade area
Yeah.
had said these people are persona non grata in our in our venues. The governor of Florida made a statement. The mayor of Florida made a statement. Right? Florida saw this happen and shut it down. And that sends a message not just to the people that did it that time. It sends a message to anybody that will ever think about pulling a stunt like that in Florida. Not only this will not be tolerated, but this will not be tolerated and you will face severe personal consequences. And nobody is going to say, you were just joking. Oh, I guess never mind then.
Well, this is why the consequences for any of this stuff is so important, whether it's throwing soup on a masterpiece or anything else, or protesting, quote unquote, protesting where you're actually being an insurrectionist. All of this stuff. This is one of the reasons why on this show we talk constantly about how disappointed we are in the lack of accountability and a lack of consequences that are coming for people, because that's what we need. We need people to be made examples of. Can you imagine if from day one, when these terror supporters started marching, they all were frog marched directly into a paddy wagon, or hit with a fire hose, and I'm in the water, everybody, relax, or all tased until they pooped themselves? I think you would have seen a lot less of these protests. If the minute the encampments went up on university campuses, if all those tents had been lit on fire and everyone been arrested, you think there would have been a bunch more encampments? This is something we're talking about the medical professionals. I'm reminded of, hang on, I'll just say one of the big problems is, again, I come back to it over and over again because it's one of the biggest cancers we have, is the way the media report on things. And so when something happens, they will leave out pertinent details to make it seem like, hey, this doesn't apply to you. This is its own animal. There was a case, this is a little off, but there was a case in 2016. I'll never forget reading about this in Moscow, where there was this, I don't remember the details, the names, but there was this Uzbeki Muslim nanny who was caring for a child in a house, and some 4-year-old little girl. The parents went off to work. She killed the kid. She cut the kid's head off, ran into the street holding the beheaded, head up, screaming, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. And when I read that story in Israel. Then I came back to the United States. And when I read the story in the American newspaper, it left out the Muslim, it left out the Allahu Akbar, and it talked about mental health. That's how you don't.
Underneath it said, if you're thinking about suicide,
yeah, right,
call,
exactly.
or homicide, call this number. I just wanted to give you one more example, guy, before I want to move on a little bit, because somebody in the rants just brought up something, in the Rumble rants brought up something that I think is very interesting. But also a librarian from Ripley, believe it or not, I'm not kidding, that's not what it's called, but Ripley, West Virginia, is accused of trying to recruit people on social media to assassinate President Trump. Not making this up. She is not a vision for you look-wise. But the suspect is identified as 39-year-old Morgan L. Morrow of Jackson County Public Library. She is now in a lot of trouble, obviously. She has been detained, arrested, and transported to CRJ. So to Golan's point, that's what needs to be done. People need to be made lessons of. This needs to be broadcast out loud. But somebody brought up something, Guy, in the rants that I think is extremely important, because I've brought this up a lot. If the left had the ability, because they use Nazism so much, I truly believe they would go there. Hillary Clinton said it herself, we need to be reprogrammed. And what somebody brought up in the rants is the Iranian regime executing hospitalized patients with headshots on the gurneys. That's what we have in these leftist nurses. But take it a step further, that's what we have in these leftists in our country. If they had the ability to inflict this pain on us, Guy, they would be no different than the Iranians, than Hamas, given the opportunity.
The ultimate irony is these people think like the Nazis that they pretend everybody else is. And I'm sorry to be saying it out loud because it's actually painful to say it. These people don't see the people that they disagree with politically as human. They are perfectly willing to accept violence on behalf of their ideology. They're out in the streets cheering on the Palestinians whose ideology is rooted in Nazism. These people who say that they would stand up to Nazis are the people who would be lining up to sign up for the Weihnacht. They would be the ones in the uniforms goose-stepping down the streets. And it scares me. It's a scary world, not only because the Nazism is making a comeback at the extremes on the right, not only because Nazism is making a comeback in Islamic supremacism, but because the left, which historically was the thing that did stand against Nazism, originally, right? Antifa did stand against Nazism. By the way, Antifa Germany still stands against Nazism. Totally different from Antifa in the United States. But that's a side quest. The left, having taken up the Nazi ideas into their ideology, scares the hell out of me, because that means it's coming from all the directions.
Yeah, and I think you can see that, to Guy's point, as I mentioned earlier, that a growing segment, and I would say, I don't want to say a majority, I'm hoping it's not a majority, but at least a growing segment of the radical left have now become totally cool with political violence. It's part of the equation. It's virtuous even. The Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, who represent everyone from Mamdani to AOC and a bunch of psychopaths in between, they, after the murder of two diplomats working for the Israeli government, one wasn't even Jewish, they celebrated that murder. Those murders. They celebrated the murderer. And there wasn't a single politician that said, whoa, I'm going to go ahead and disassociate from the DSA, because that's obviously an insane thing to say. They just kept on trucking. And that's just the way it is now. Violence is bad unless we decide the target deserves it.
But it's not just violence, it's racial hierarchy. They've reintroduced the concept of racial hierarchy. Socialism, colorblind. Nazism, socialism plus racial hierarchy. It's just important to understand that in terms of what we're seeing them become, it's very scary. And it's not everybody, it's not all the left, it's not even most of the left, it's the radicals at the extreme, just like it's the radicals at the extreme of the right. This is not a problem of left versus right, it's a problem that any time that one side lets its extreme run away, all of society suffers. On the right, we have a responsibility to take care of our extremes. It's the right's job to call out Candace Owens. It's the right's job to call out Tucker Carlson. It's the right's job to call out Nick Fuentes. On the left, if they don't start calling out this emerging ideology on their extreme, everybody suffers.
Now, Judith, do you believe that they've gone too far and they can no longer call it out because they've become the primary drivers of the party?
100%. I don't think there's a question about it at all. I mean, this is where they've drawn their line in the sand. This is because they don't have abortion or something to run on. This is what they're going to run on. And there's no coming back. I mean, listen, I don't believe there's coming back from how far they've gone. To use The Walking Dead as an example, once the brain stem gets eaten and rotten, there's no recouping that. We've brought this up on the show many times. I don't think a 9/11 would have an effect. I don't think anything would have an effect to bring these people. I mean, when you think about it like this, just really think about it. What Guy was bringing up, what you brought up before about the Israeli protesters, all of them who had served in the army, they did it peacefully, whatever you want to say. They're all patriots. And the second October 7th happened, they all went to fight. All these jackasses, vigilantes, insurrectionists, whatever you want to call them, have absolutely zero loyalty to the United States of America. Zero loyalty. I'm not sure when this happened, how this happened, if it's a godlessness. I think a lot of that has to do with that we live in a society that has totally lost a God. And this is what I love about Ben Shapiro talking about Christians going to church, Jews going to synagogue, alcoholics going to AA, whatever it is, wherever it is you find that place, go there, because these people are so far gone, there's no coming back.
And so the way that I would express it is, I think that the party and the system on the left is so far gone. There is a large subset of people who currently vote Democrat who are not part of that extreme fringe, and they have a choice to jump off of that sinking ship, right? I don't think you can save the ship, but I think that there are a lot of good people who can save themselves by making a decision that this has gone too far, that they're not willing to support a party that promotes insurrection.
The problem is, Guy, is they think they are on the right side. It is so no matter.
I'll add one thing though. Sorry, just to interrupt for 1 second. They also have gone out of their way, the media and everyone else and social media, to make sure that Donald Trump is positioned as the devil. So even if you are not a radical, well, the one thing you can't do is vote for Donald Trump or anyone in his sphere. So therefore, I guess these radicals are my only choice. That's the other thing.
Yeah. So, Guy, I love your optimism, but I think your optimism comes from especially you living in Israel, and again, as we always say, 95% of Israelis will say on a Friday night to each other, Shabbat Shalom, right? Which means, have a peaceful Sabbath. Then I'm talking about religious, non-religious, Christian, secular, whoever it is, everybody's
The
wishing
Arabs
each
say
other.
it.
Right. Even the Arabs say it. Everybody's wishing it. We don't have that here. We've totally, when you look at the Super Bowl coming up, the halftime show, right? And we didn't bring this up yesterday, but obviously, well, I've actually stopped watching the halftime since what's his name? Jay-Z has
Jay-Z.
become the
Yeah.
has become the picker of who performs, but I actually stopped watching it when they didn't pick the Killers to play the halftime show. But
Amen.
the fact that they have Bad Bunny, and I think it's now also they added Green Day to the bill, who are famous, obviously famous Trump haters, but they have a song called American Idiot and all that stuff. There isn't this chance right now. It's like people that like, look, Trump won in a blowout, right? Electorally. Was it a Nixon blowout? No. Was it a Reagan blowout? No. Those blowouts are never going to happen again. I don't even see the House ever having a 10-point lead, where there being 10 on one side or 10 on the other. That's how tribal, that's how off we've gone, guy. So it's very different than other places.
First of all, Ian, I'm sorry to hear that. I would like to offer at least my little ray of hope, which is that I think that Trump in and of himself is an incredibly polarizing figure and has been. My great hope for America is that in 2028, Marco Rubio will be on the ticket, who is he's a brilliant politician, but he's also very palatable to people who come from the left and want to make a more sensible decision. And that those people that don't agree with the extremists, but are currently trapped between a rock and a hard place, will have a much easier time saying, you know what, I didn't like Donald Trump. He was the devil. Marco Rubio seems like a nice enough guy. These other people are nuts. They've been nuts for a while now, and they kind of scare me. So I'm just going to go for the moderate conservative president. And then Marco Rubio is going to turn out to be completely rearrange the entire world order in a positive way for America and everyone else.
Guy, are there Alcoholics Anonymous meetings near you? I'm kidding. The greatest experience of my life, by the way, was
I just want to say that, and you've heard me speak on this before. You mentioned it with Ben Shapiro. I want to reiterate it again because I wasn't going to, but you mentioned repeating is part of the messaging. What's eating this country can be solved really only by Judeo-Christian values. The moral and spiritual rot that has eaten away at American society, eaten away at our moral framework is out of control. I think that Christianity, Judaism, sure, but Judaism is small and Christianity is big. And I think that the church, not organized religion per se, I know that everyone's going to come at me for that, but the idea of Christianity being one of the load-bearing pillars of American society is undeniable. My father raised me knowing that America is a Christian country and that we as Jews were guests in it, and act accordingly and make sure that you are remaining morally on high ground. And that used to be something that people strived for, and it is no longer the case. The idea of just looking at Christianity, human dignity, being something that came because we were made in the image of God, and all of the rights that are endowed and the equality and the restraint on power and everything else that came with that, you strip it all away and you're left with this moral relativism that is exactly what we're seeing every day now with all these people running amok, where it's just, victimhood is currency and the truth replaced by whatever narrative they want it to be replaced by. And this is the only thing that can really save us. Luckily, we are seeing upticks in people going back to church. Not enough as far as I'm concerned, and I would love to see more of it, but at least it's moving in the right direction.
Well said, both of you. This is the last thing I want to ask, because I saw this story on X. I sent it to both of you. Did Bibi Netanyahu came out today and say that they were running out of ammo, and that's why a lot of soldiers died, because Biden was slow rolling the ammo being sent to Israel?
I didn't see this guy. Did you see that?
So he said Moshet. He didn't. I think the way it's being presented is ammunition, and people are presenting it like bullets. The impression I get from the original Hebrew is that he meant bombs. What he's saying is that Israeli soldiers died because the IDF didn't have the equipment it needed to operate in a way that would prevent them being dead.
That was already contracted and paid for.
And that was the result of it being slow rolled by the Biden administration.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's to come out with a statement like that, Golan, is extremely damning and it's extremely telling. I know they're working now on getting a new 10-year deal structured. I think it's going to be less money. I think it's going to be a very different deal than the deal that's structured right now. And I hope Americans can see the value in that deal, the value in what Israel is actually bringing to the table.
I won't hold
By
my
the way,
breath, but I will repeat for everybody what I constantly am crowing about, that if the Israel-America deal, whether you call it the aid or whatever else word you want to apply to it, if that goes away, Israel will be fine, and the party that suffers is America. Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
I'd also like to add that one of the really important things about that deal is that Benjamin Netanyahu announced that Israel would be moving away from its taking
And
any
Trump is like,
military aid from the
no.
United States.
Trump was
And,
like, please don't.
Trump immediately said, "Tell you what, how about you sign a 20-year deal instead of 10?"
Yeah, Trump
Right.
and Lindsey Graham are like, no.
America understands the strategic necessity of its military relationship with Israel. I think one of the things that we're looking at right now, particularly as the world moves to a war footing, is that there are two countries in the world with tested militaries. That's Israel and Ukraine. Ukraine's has been an amateur. Ukraine's has been brilliant, but it's been amateur, it's been improvised, and it's been jerry-rigged. And Israel's has been the only professionally well-equipped military engaged in a multi-front war. And the performance has been remarkable. They've achieved results from American equipment that the manufacturers said was impossible. And they gave all of that information back to the United States. So the United States equipment that is currently on its way to a potential war is substantially better than it would have been had Israel not first taken it out for a test run and figured out how to make it better and given that information back as part of the relationship with it has, because that's not an obligation. If you buy a car from a manufacturer and do some things to make it better, you don't have to call the manufacturer back and say, listen, here's my secret to making your car work better. But Israel does that, and that means that the United States of America now has not only battle tested their army without their equipment without ever having to put an American life at risk, but has equipment that's twice as good as it would have been, planes that can fly for twice as many hours between repair runs as the manufacturer spec says they have to run, that can fly further, that can carry more load. And basically, the U.S. Army right now is the scariest force in the world. And part of the reason for that is because Israel has made sure that all of their gear is going to work. If the Chinese army hasn't been tested, the Russian army has failed.
And this is important, by the way. This is why you see China chucking stuff over to the Russians so they can use it in Ukraine, stuff like that, because no matter how many simulations, and it's like, again, I went to law school for a minute, but one of the things they told us at the beginning is you will leave law school not understanding how to practice law. Until you're in a courtroom and you're faced with a judge and a jury, nothing will be the same. That's where you actually learn how to do it. And the same thing is here. Simulations only go so far. Here, real enemy contact, immediate feedback, stress testing under fire, in dense urban combat, in tunnel warfare. Where can America do this? In drone-saturated airspace with literally like cyber battlefields, kinetic battlefields, stuff that simply can't be done through simulations. And to Guy's point, and this is where I want to make sure our listeners hear this sentence, it saves countless American lives and saves America billions of dollars. It is important for you to hear that over and over again, because no matter how much money they quote unquote aid to Israel, nothing compares to the amount of money America is saving and lives that America is saving because of Israel being a part of that partnership.
Well done, both of you. Last thing I wanted to say is because Guy was talking with Golan, I think after the show yesterday, where I said, if Iran does launch ballistic missiles, like I have this image in my head of like the Egypt, of Mubarak, of the heads of the UAE, all in a bunker in Israel. I just it would be like the greatest screenshot of all time of like Bibi in a bunker with the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, everybody. Saudi Arabia, not welcome at this point. MBS, you're on your own.
So you know what? One of the really interesting things that came up in a conversation I was having today about
I didn't know this would lead to a whole other conversation, but go on.
So it's important because I think that sometimes people don't understand that one of the things people accuse Donald Trump of is being aggressive and trying to get into wars. One of the things that you're seeing is the reason it's taking time for anything to start with Iran is because there are American radar systems and missile defense systems being deployed in all of the countries that you mentioned, in Israel, in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, right? The United States has taken into account what the Iranians could do and is actively making sure that it defends every possible American base and every possible American ally
That's the only
before
reason
the.
I hope Qatar's doesn't fail is because of the American base.
But I think it's important to note that that's the president being incredible. That's the president, the Secretary of War, and the armed forces being incredibly diligent
Throw in the
and
Secretary
the
of State.
exact opposite of being the recklessness that they're accused of.
Well, yeah, and obviously Marco Rubio is who Golan was referring to. And well done, both of you. We have run out of time. Amazing job. Guy, you look fantastic in your button-down shirt and your new dazzling haircut. The
I'm
beard
going to have to
lost about
step up my game here. This is ridiculous.
the beard lost about 8 inches. You look dynamite. I want to thank everybody that's been following us and listening, and especially all the fine folk on Truth Social. You add so much to the conversation from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you. You can find us everywhere at thedailycheatsheet.com. I want to wish everybody a good morning, afternoon, and night world, wherever you are. God bless you all.